Welcome to our compilation of 8 battles from the Pacific. It's June the 4th, 1942, at 6:16 in the morning, and high above the Pacific, 72 Japanese bombers and their fighter escorts mercilessly blast through the defending American aircraft and barrel on towards their target. It's an idyllic atoll, home to an important American air and naval base. The air raid sirens howl across the island. Its defenders look up to see Japanese fighters and bombers swarming from above. Bursts of flak blossom overhead, multiplying with each minute as the Americans rush to their stations and anti-aircraft guns open fire. Both sides know that the outcome of this battle will have far-reaching consequences. Today, the Japanese attack Midway. Bombs and bullets rain down on the island airbase. Tracers zip skywards and targets are decimated one by one. The power plant, the oil storage facility, the seaplane hangar, and then the hospital alongside warehouses and the Marines command post. But the Americans put up a fierce resistance, bringing down at least 5 Japanese aircraft and damaging many more. Despite causing great destruction, the Japanese failed to neutralize US air power, with the American runways remaining intact. From the cockpit of his SPD Dauntless dive bomber, Lieutenant Richard Halsey Best looks out across the blue expanse of the Pacific Ocean. He's commanding a squadron of 15 Dauntless bombers. In another plane, Earl Gallagher commands another 15 aircraft. Both squadrons are part of a flight of 33 bombers, led by Lieutenant Commander McCluskey. Thanks in part to the cracking of Japanese naval codes, American commanders are aware of some of the Japanese operation to attack Midway. The only way to stop the Japanese is to find and destroy their most powerful assets, the aircraft carriers. Known as the Kido Butai, the Japanese aim is to use these carriers to neutralize and capture Midway, and then to use the island as a trap, luring in the last of the severely weakened American Pacific naval forces that have survived Pearl Harbor into a decisive battle. McCluskey leads the flight over the area he estimates Kido Butai to be, only to find an empty square of ocean. But that's not his only problem. He looks down at his controls to see his fuel levels are dangerously low. He presses on, determined that this flight will not be for nothing. He turns the formation to fly west, then to fly northwest, intending to conduct a standard box search. McCluskey grits his teeth, praying for a change in fortune. He spots a white streak in the ocean, the trail of a Japanese destroyer making at great speed. Its white wake paints an arrow in the blanket of the blue sea.
I see them, boys. I finally see them.
The ship is clearly trying to catch up to the Kido Butai. Best, McCluskey and Gallagher feel a surge of optimism, and McCluskey leads the flight north. As they draw closer and the dark shapes fade to the clear outlines of Japanese aircraft carriers, they know they've found the Kido Butai. But Best notices the impressive formation appears to be in some disarray. Far below its sea level, there are American planes already attacking the fleet. It's Lem Massey's torpedo squadron from the Yorktown. Best soon realizes it's a conclusion of a disaster. The slow and vulnerable TBD Devastators are no match for the defending Japanese Zeros and countless anti-aircraft guns. The TBDs are cut down mercilessly, and what's left of them flies in disarray, with every man for himself. High above, McCluskey observes the 4 Japanese carriers. The southernmost and nearest is the giant Kaga. 2 miles ahead of it and 5 to 7 miles to the right is the Akagi, flagship of the Kido Butai's commander, Admiral Nagumo. 14 miles beyond them, it's the Hiryu. Another 6 miles beyond her is the Soryu. Although the Japanese defense is impressive, the box formation of the Kido Butai has completely disintegrated. Each ship is several miles away from the next, having maneuvered to avoid the American torpedo attack, crammed with planes, still being rearmed and unable to take off. McCluskey's American dive bombers have the crucial element of surprise. Not only that, but unknown to any in McCluskey's group, another dive bomber squadron from Yorktown has arrived on scene at the same time by pure chance. Both squadrons are unaware of each other's presence, and if they did attack the same ship, there could be mid-air collisions.
Earl, you and I take the carrier on the left. Best, you take the carrier on the right.
As luck would have it, McCluskey heads for the Kaga and Akagi, while the other squadron head for the distant Soryu. Although the Japanese are yet to spot the dive bombers, another problem threatens to throw away the advantage of surprise.
Wade, I'm taking the left hand. Let's show them what we've got.
Best doesn't hear McCluskey's command. Neither party hears each other. Both Best and McCluskey now prepare to dive on Kaga. Best prepares his squadron. They form an echelon, and the pilots prepare to dive by shifting to low blower and low prop pitch, opening their canopies in case they need to bail out. Best has no idea that right above him, McCluskey and Gallagher are doing exactly the same thing. Danger mounts as the two squadrons are now on a path for collision. Best eases forward entering a dive. Just as McCluskey and Gallagher's swarm of Dauntless barrel down in front of him, missing a catastrophic collision with him and his squadron by mere yards. Best reels backwards, stunned by the pure luck of his survival. But there's no time for him to truly digest what's just happened. He assumes McCluskey and Gallagher have decided to jump his target. Thinking quickly, he closes his flaps and waggles his ailerons to try and signal to the rest of his squadron to abort. But he's too late. 10 of his pilots join the cascade of dive bombers. Only Best's two wingmen, Ed Kroger and Ensign Frederick Weber, are close enough to see his frantic signals and hold up. McCluskey, Earl Gallagher, and 25 other Dauntlesses hurtle towards the Kaga. Lacking radar, the only warning the Japanese aboard the ship have is the thundering of planes as they turn their eyes skywards. The first 3 bombers miss, but the Kaga is plunged into chaos as orders are screamed across the deck for the men to crank every gun skyward. Earl Gallagher grips his sight, trained on the immense aircraft carrier. This has to be a hit. The ship's outline fills up his sights. As he gets closer and closer, he clenches his jaw and releases. The 500-pound armor-piercing bomb hurtles towards the ship and slams squarely in the middle of the flight deck. Bomb after bomb find their marks in succession. The next comes for the Kaga's bridge. It's obliterated by a direct hit, full of planes being rearmed and refueled. A chain reaction of catastrophic explosions rocks the ship. 1 carrier is down. From 12,000 feet above, Best watches the drama unfold. Single dive bombers from the American carrier Yorktown dive for another Japanese carrier, the Soryu. Hit after hit tears the Soryu apart, unleashing internal explosions that tear through the men and planes alike. The first 2 carriers are being pummeled at 4 or 5 second intervals, smoke pouring into the sky. Amidst the chaos, Best carefully plans his next move. With only 2 pilots having remained at his side, he leads the 3-plane formation to bank right. Climbing back up to 14,000 feet, Best and his wingmen prepare to make an attack run on the Akagi, Admiral Nagumo's flagship. The Japanese are focused on the conflict at sea level, yet despite holding the advantage of surprise, Best is unsure of what he can do with just 3 planes. He can't divide them to attack at different angles with such a small number, and the dire fuel situation means he can't maneuver for a bow-on attack. Best and his wingmen must hit the ship across its relatively narrow 100-foot width, rather than its 850-foot length. Even a small miscalculation could leave the bombs missing the hull. Memories of Pearl Harbor fresh in his mind. Best is determined to give the Japanese a taste of their own medicine. He makes a decision.
Let's get them, boys.
On his signal, the planes open their flaps and ease into a long dive. It was a calm and placid morning, he would later recall, thinking that it just felt like a regular individual battle practice drill. As they near the ship, Best puts his bomb sight into the middle of the Akagi's flight deck. He watches 1-0 fighter taxi and take off from the ship. He's determined to make it the last. Bombs soar towards the aircraft carrier as one bomb hits the bow. The other, near the stern. At 1,500 feet, Best wrenches the release lever and his bomb lands square in the middle of the flight deck. As the plane levels, he can't resist to look back. A chain of explosions rocks the ship, igniting a flood of aviation fuel from carts and wrecked planes. Under most circumstances, a big carrier like this could be expected to absorb 4 or 5 bomb hits and still function. But Best's one bomb has just hit in the right place at the right moment. The Akagi has been obliterated. Having descended to low altitude, Best and his 2 wingmen zip through the carnage of Zero fighters who continue to target the hapless Devastator torpedo bombers. Best resists the urge to dogfight. His job is to bomb the aircraft carriers. As Best turns for home, leaving the devastated Kido Butai behind him, he spots a black shape looming on the horizon. His heart races and he speeds for home as fast as he can. Touching down on the Enterprise, Best sprints to the flag bridge to find Rear Admiral Raymond Spruance, commander of the American task force. On his way, he comes face to face with McCluskey, who's just landed. Best notices that blood is running down McCluskey's arm and dripping onto the deck. McCluskey has parts of 5 bullets in his arm and shoulder, and before he can hear Best's news, he's rushed off to the sickbay. Best makes it to the bridge and quickly makes his case to Admiral Spruance.
There are 3 carriers aflame and burning, but there's a 4th one up to the north. Permission to rearm and take off right away, sir?
No, wait for the orders. We will get them.
Yes, sir.
But Best has to wait several hours before he can take off again. At 2:45 p.m, a report comes in.
Admiral, we have their position.
1 carrier, 2 battleships, 3 heavy cruisers, 4 destroyers, course north, speed 20 knots. The enemy ships bear 278 degrees from Task Force 16. The Americans immediately scramble what they have. The force is a shadow of its former self. Just 27 SBDs are available. With McCluskey staying behind due to his injuries, Gallagher is now in charge, leading 6 SBDs, with Best leading 4, and Lieutenant Dave Shumway in charge of 14 from Yorktown. Now it's 5 o'clock in the evening. They spot what remains of the Kido Butai on the darkening horizon. Gallagher orders Shumway,
you take the battleships. Roger that.
leaving him and Best's 10 aircraft to take out the Hiryu, the last of the carriers. Although the Japanese have Zeros patrolling at altitude, it's only as Gallagher eases forward and plunges into a dive that they discover the Americans. For a second time today, the Japanese are caught by surprise. Yet, the Hiryu's guns put up an impressive resistance. Gallagher watches the fire from the anti-aircraft's muzzles light up both sides of the carrier as he fixes his bomb sight. But just as he commits to his dive angle, the Hiryu turns sharply. She's surprisingly agile for a big ship, and it catches Gallagher off guard. He's already committed to the dive. He attempts to compensate by pulling up as he releases a bomb. The bomb misses astern, and Gallagher wrenches his back, pulling out of the hard G's. After witnessing the next 2 bombs also miss the ship, Shumway decides to forget about the battleships and leads his squadron against the carrier. It's the right decision, but it throws the pilots into confusion as Shumway's group and Best's 4-plane section both dive on the Hiryu at the same time. Once again, Best finds himself having to maneuver at the last moment while he's preparing to dive. Turning to come in at a different angle gives the enemy Zero fighters a second chance to attack, and Best and his planes hold their turn. He looks to his side to see bullets rake his wingman, Fred Weber's aircraft. Best watches his friend hurtle towards the ocean, a wave of rage racing through him. He points his plane straight for the starboard bow. For the second time that day, Dick Best's bomb slams into a ship, striking her forward elevator and blowing part of it into Hiryu's small island. 3 more bombs strike in succession, all in the same area, creating a single massive crater in our flight deck. From high above, it looks as if a giant's hand has reached down and scooped out the Hiryu's bow section, leaving a gaping cavern in its wake. Like her sister ships, she's been wrecked beyond recovery. Dick Best prepares to return to the Enterprise in a bittersweet victory, mourning the loss of Weber and glancing down to survey the devastation. In just a day, the Battle of Midway had been won. It's December the 13th, 1943, and the skies over Assam, and Second Lieutenant Philip R. Adair is climbing quickly after being told to scramble. He spots what looks like 4 enemy planes and goes in close in his beloved Lulubelle. It's the start of an incredible engagement that will see Adair face insurmountable odds. As Adair gets closer, he can see it's not 4 planes, but 4 flights of 6 bombers each, and they're being escorted by fighters above and below them. The other P-40s from the Burma Banshees are still taking off, but Adair can't wait around as he realizes that over 60 Japanese planes are heading straight for his home base and the US complex there, including the hospitals. One man against that many planes means almost certain death. But he pushes that thought to the back of his mind and puts the throttle to full in Lulubelle and determinedly heads straight for the enemy. The following is part of a voice recording by Adair, recalling the events on that day.
I called up control and said, look, they're going to be releasing their bombs pretty quick, and I don't know if I can do much of anything or not. I'm going to do the best I can to mess up their attack.
The bombers were the threat, and he knew that if he took one shot at a fighter, he would lose the advantage of surprise. If the attack was to stand any chance of success, he had to go against the bombers first. He decided to come in from high above on the left, trying to get some shots into the lead flight at maximum range.
I started firing at pretty long range out because I knew all I could do was fire enough traces across the front of them to kind of shake things up a little bit. And I could see that as soon as I started shooting, they got a little nervous because the bombers were bouncing up and down, and I wasn't paying attention to fighters at that time. So almost before I knew what was happening, I was around behind the last flight and picked out the last bomber in there and went after his left engine.
He could see hits on the engine and what looked like fire coming out of the bomber. But he overtook so quickly that he couldn't really tell what was going on. At this point, the Zeros were about to attack, but Adair had an escape maneuver at the ready. Adair pushes the stick full forward into the left corner and into a -G outside roll and a high-speed dive. Eventually, he pulls out and looks around. Thankfully, the Zeros were going back to defending the bomber formation. While his attack rattled the bomber crews, the bombers completed their mission and released their bombs. The bomb pattern fell short and off to the side of the target area. Adair later said that even though some thought his attack contributed to the poor bombing by the Japanese, he doubted that he had made that much of an impact. He now had another choice. Should he head for home? He'd faced insurmountable odds and gotten out alive, but he couldn't let it go. It worked once. He was sure he could do it again. Climbing, he got above and behind the formation. He starts another run.
It looked like nobody was paying any attention to me until I started getting close to the bombers. And then it looked like every damn Zero in the sky was coming for me. And I think, well, there's no way in the world I'm going to get close to the bombers again. I'll just try to pick off a fighter or two. So I picked out the top one and tried to get a shot in at him, but he knew I was there. And about the time I got in range, he made a real sharp turn and he was out of my range, out of my sight real quick. So I just picked the next one. He was a little more stupid, so he waited until I got in pretty close, and he had just started a turn about the time I started shooting at him. And right away I saw his left gear drop, and it looked like his engine was on fire. Then he went into a spiral, so I pulled off the side to get away from there and watched him, and he crashed in the jungle a short distance from there. I climbed back up again, and I thought, well, what the hell? I might as well have another shot at the bombers, like a stupid jerk. So here I go against the bombers again, and before I could get in range, they were Zeros from the left, Zeros from the right. I said, well, I better get into my escape maneuver because I'm not going to get a shot at anybody. So as I rolled over, I could look down and see a Zero coming straight up at me. Right away, I knew I was in trouble because he had a dead beat on where I was going. I couldn't get out of the way. Then wham, wham, wham. It sounded like a bunch of gravel.
Adair realizes that Full Stick Ford did not seem to be getting him out of the line of fire. He grabs the trim crank and sets it to full nose down position, giving him just a bit more additional forward angle. Tracers whiz by and Lulubao is hit. There's an explosion behind the cockpit and fire comes shooting forward around both sides of the armor plate. Fortunately, in the high-speed dive, the fire goes out. Adair holds the dive, with the ground rushing to meet him. As late as he dare leave it, he tries to pull out. There's something wrong. The jungle gets closer and closer. It seems with the trim in full forward position, the cable's been shot through and getting the plane level is a colossal effort. He yanks back on the throttle with both hands on the stick, the jungle rushing towards him. He's finally able to get the nose up and into the sky. With a prayer of thanks and the Zeros far behind him, he heads for home. But it quickly becomes apparent that his troubles are not yet done.
I got a little ways and realized that I was going to have a problem because it was very hard to hold the nose up above the horizon, even using both hands. And I tried to get the seat belt around the stick and fasten it, but it wasn't long enough. And I kept losing altitude as long as I was flying right side up. And about this time I see another airplane that is going in the opposite direction from me. And he's about, a quarter mile off to my left. And I couldn't tell what it was until he got close enough, and it was a Zero. And he was smoking like the devil and looked like he was losing altitude, and must have been one of the ones that I hit somewhere earlier. So I watched him, and I'm sure he was watching me. I went by him on the right, and he just kept going. And I thought, oh, what the hell? So I hauled it around and come screaming up his rear end, get a dead beat on him, squeeze the trigger, and all I can hear was the pneumatic system recharging the guns, and there wasn't any ammunition left. So I went screaming by him, and he simply pulled over and started shooting at me. But he didn't hit me, and I got out of there and headed on back.
Making his escape from the Zero, Adair realized that he was around 100 miles from home. The plane kept pulling down, so he called control with his position. He told them he was going to bail out because he couldn't keep the plane out of the jungle. He kept on nursing the plane, as every 100 yards in the jungle could be as much as 2 days walking. He later said,
and then I got smart. I'll just turn it upside down and see what happens. So I flipped over upside down, and it ran pretty good for a little while, and it climbed, and I got quite a bit of altitude. And then the engine started cutting out again, so I flip it back right side up. The engine comes back, starts running smooth.
He lost count of how many times he went through this same maneuver, but eventually he made it back to his airbase. Upon final approach and upside down, he released the landing gear. Flipping the plane over at the last minute, Lulubao's white-rimmed wheels kissed the runway, and she landed safely. It was Adair's 44th mission. He later said, "For me, mission number 44 was my most exciting. I don't know if I could stand that much excitement again. But after that, I was convinced that number 44 was my lucky number. It was also the number painted on the side of Lulubao." Lieutenant Adair, who challenged 64 Japanese planes, received the Silver Star for this action. We would very much like to thank Robin and Luke Adair, son and grandson of retired Colonel Philip Adair, for their very kind help in this script and for giving us permission to use the voice and images in this film. They have an excellent website, burmabanshees.com, where you can see some incredible photos from the men who were there. In honour of the Burma Banshees, we've made this tribute emblazoned on 100% black cotton. Wear the legend and grab it before it flies out by clicking on the link in the description. It's the early dawn on the 10th of December 1941. A task force of ships are off the coast of Malaya. They're hoping to launch a surprise attack against the Japanese, who they think are in Kuantan. The head of the task force is the HMS Prince of Wales and its captain, John Jack Leach.
Sir, Tenedos is signalling distress.
Bloody fools. We're under radio silence. This has better be good.
Leach speaks urgently with Admiral Phillips.
Sir, Tenedos is under a Japanese bomber attack.
It's the worst possible situation.
Get everyone ready.
With horror, they need to accept that the Japanese have found them and the entirety of Task Force Z is within range. Outside, the air trembles with the engines of Japanese aircraft. They come through the clouds and line up their target. First, they go for the aging battlecruiser, HMS Repulse. The bombs are away. They scream down towards the ship, and a tall column of water erupts on the starboard side, followed by several more on the port side. Captain Tennant of Repulse orders,
"All hands to action stations!"
A 250-kilogram bomb screams down. There's an enormous explosion as the bomb hits the Repulse amidships. The captain is thrown to the floor, as are the rest of the bridge. The bomb has penetrated through the port seaplane hangar and devastated the armoured deck below. It's a scene of carnage as the fallen lie around the hangar. Repulse emerges from the fray with a plume of smoke coming from her upper deck where she'd been struck.
Damage report.
No critical damage.
Her speed, though, is unaffected and she steams on, emitting just the faintest smoke curl. On the Prince of Wales, Leach turns and gives an order.
Action stations. Repel aircraft.
More shapes emerge from the clouds. It's 67 Japanese bombers. Two squadrons separate and approach the capital ships in a pincer formation designed to reduce the effectiveness of the British anti-aircraft gunfire. From 8 miles away, they begin their dive. Philip's demeanour hardens as he broadcasts the order,
"All ships increase speed to 25 knots. All captains are granted freedom to maneuver."
An officer hunches over his radio.
For a message. Over.
His face drops.
Sir, the aircraft to port appeared to be carrying torpedoes.
There is no such aircraft around.
Phillips observes the sight through binoculars and watches aghast. The Japanese aircraft continue to lose height and fly into some low cloud before appearing off the Prince of Wales port bow. 9 Japanese planes start their approach. They see the British ship in the distance as they come in skimming the waves. There's a flash as one by one the British anti-aircraft guns open fire. Tracers arc up towards the black dots in the sky, and after 12 salvos, the guns switch from controlled fire at individual planes to barrage fire, hurling a curtain of bursting shells to provide a flak barrier for the hostile planes, desperately trying to force them to drop their torpedoes early. The Japanese planes keep coming. The loaders begin trembling as they push shells into the magazine feeds, hoping that something, anything, will down just one of the planes. The British anti-aircraft gunners, however, are unprepared for the sheer speed of the Japanese planes. Most of the British anti-aircraft shells burst well behind the aircraft as they bear down upon the British ships. Battered but still flying, the Japanese pilots bravely push on until their torpedoes are in range. They drop. The fish are away. On the Prince of Wales, there's horror as Captain Leach barks the order,
"Hard to port!"
attempting to slip through the tracks of the torpedoes. Meanwhile, the Japanese bombers are too large and too fast to pull away quickly, and they fly straight at the Prince of Wales, machine gunning as they go, reaching the battleship well before their torpedoes do, and causing disorder on her decks, killing and wounding sailors as they approach. The British gunners are now firing at near point-blank range. A Betty bomber takes a flak shell to the wing, which snaps it from the body, causing it to spin and dramatically slam into the water. But there's no time to celebrate. 2 torpedoes move straight towards the ship, and there's no avoiding a hit. All the men aboard brace for impact.
Down!
The first one strikes. A pillar of water erupts on the port side of the Prince of Wales and punches through the outer hull, but thankfully there's only limited flooding. Moments later, the second torpedo strikes the Prince of Wales under her stern, blasting open a hole some 4 meters high and 6 meters wide. It's a critical blow. There's now a direct route for water into the very heart of the ship, sweeping sailors off their feet and drowning the ship's engine room. Her speed immediately starts dropping as water floods into her. Emergency pumps are unable to stop the steady rise. The sailors continue to attempt repairs, wading through water now waist deep to get to the hull. She begins listing to port. On the deck, the gunners keep shooting to the point where the air can almost burn the skin, but their rounds explode behind the Japanese planes and the men brace for another impact.
Brace for impact!
All the sailors can do is watch, wait, hold on and hope. The tracks zip towards the ship and a torpedo strikes the Prince of Wales. Her electrical system at the stern suffers massive damage. Without power, both the steering motors are dead. The Prince of Wales is a sitting duck. She's now a death trap. Captain Leach orders,
"Flood the void spaces of the starboard torpedo defense system. We need the ship level."
He needs the ship level, or almost level, so that his men can train their anti-aircraft guns, which are currently pointing too high. But this also makes the ship more vulnerable should she receive another torpedo strike. The sailors strap on any small arms they can to the side of the ship in a last-ditch defense. By 12:19, the Prince of Wales is left with little anti-aircraft protection. The gunners pour water on their boiling barrels and the loaders scramble to and from the magazine, knowing this will be a gamble at best. A gunner looks up.
Contact, due east.
A huge formation of aircraft sweep down like a cloud, losing height and once again splitting into 2 attack formations. 6 Betty bombers come in low and race towards the Prince of Wales on her raised starboard side, flying under the anti-aircraft fire she could offer on that side. The sailors begin firing with anything they could raise from below, but it's to no avail. All the fire goes harmlessly above the attackers. Torpedoes drop in quick succession. The sailors watch in horror as 3 torpedo tracks come straight for them. There's a hit. A jagged hole tears right through the ship as the first torpedo blows clean out through the other side, the force of the current dragging sailors under and out of the ship. The second torpedo strikes almost directly under B turret, shooting a plume of oil and water up the side of the ship. The final torpedo strikes the unarmoured section of the hull, where there is only 1-inch thick steel. There's nothing Captain Leach can do. The steering gear of his ship is completely useless. Meanwhile, the Repulse is putting up a valiant defence against her attackers. Captain Tennant turns his great ship swiftly towards the diving aircraft, readying his vessel to pass through the tracks of the torpedoes that he knows are coming. The torpedoes drop, and as they run in the water, they leave a telltale trail of white bubbles. Captain Tennant brings all his seamanship to bear as he manages to dodge the tracks of every one of the torpedoes dropped by the two Japanese squadrons, as well as the others coming from the attack on the Prince of Wales going on at the same time. Each member of the bridge holds on as the ship leans and lists from Tennant's audacious steering. The crew speak later with pride of 19 torpedoes missing due to the maneuver, and how the huge ship had been thrown about like a destroyer. Incredibly, he also avoids all the bombs from high-level bombers dropped from 12,000 feet. But at 12:20 on the Prince of Wales, Phillips is left with no option. Reluctantly, he orders his radio signallers to break radio silence and transmit to the rest of the task force to come to the aid of the Prince of Wales and the Repulse. At 12:23, the remaining 20 or so torpedo bombers almost simultaneously pounce on Repulse from different directions. Her main guns keep firing against the incoming enemy. The 15-inch shells fly straight into the water, hoping to create a splash powerful enough to get enemy planes into the waves, but the Repulse crew is out of luck today. The first 8 aircraft drop their torpedoes on her starboard side. Captain Tennant turns Repulse to starboard to dodge the torpedoes again. But then the 3 aircraft attack Repulse on her port side. Captain Tennant can do no more than continue his turn to starboard to avoid the first 8 torpedoes. The deckhands and gunners keep up as much fire as they can, but they know it will make little difference. Men fall to the floor and cover their heads. A torpedo hits Repulse amidships on the port side, but does little significant damage. She continues manoeuvring and steams at 25 knots. Tennant is not going to stop.
Set a new heading for...
He never finishes his sentence as a torpedo hits. Immediately, 9 aircraft attack Repulse from different angles. 6 planes attempt to work their way round to her starboard side, while the remaining 3 Betty bombers go straight in at her port side. It's a skillfully executed attack. Repulse's engines are still fully functioning, but with her rudder jammed, she's simply steaming in a circle.
Tell the bridge we can't get a good view of the planes. We need to change course.
Enemy incoming!
The 3 Betty bombers fly forward, seemingly unfazed by the ack-ack fire the British can muster, and they drop their torpedoes in a slow sequence, as if contemptible of the Navy's attempts to fend them off, and they continue their course, strafing the deck and scattering the sailors as they overfly.
Of this!
A Betty ignites and spins rapidly out of control and thumps into the water. Shortly after, a gunner levelling his weapon at the approaching bomber sends a shell straight through the cockpit. And the Japanese aircraft explodes in midair. It's a small constellation. 2 explosions tear through the lower decks, immediately causing catastrophic flooding and destroying the engines. Repulse lists to port and looks done for. But the Japanese are not finished yet. At 12:25, the other 6 torpedo bombers skim the waves towards Repulse's starboard side. The men on deck watch helplessly before scattering for cover. All 6 planes release their torpedoes at once. The wait is agonizing. 2 rudimentary shots ring from the guns as the planes fly overhead, but the torpedoes are still coming. There's silence. A rating puts his head over the rail. He's rocked by a pummeling explosion. Even though 5 missed, a final torpedo scored the single hit. Over the last 4 to 5 minutes, Repulse had been hit by 4, possibly 5 torpedoes. Very quickly, the list to port starts to increase, with men leaning and staggering their way through the ship. All 51 of the Japanese torpedo bombers had now completed their attacks, but only 8 of the 34 high-level bombers had done so. 2 squadrons of high-level bombers remain that had not yet attacked, and each plane carries a single, huge, 500-kilogram bomb. At 12:33 p.m, the first 9 of these bombers starts a high-altitude attack. But their bombs are released too early and fail to find their target, missing by a considerable distance. Repulse, with multiple large holes in her hull, now is quickly sinking. The other ships from Task Force Z have now come to their aid. Captain Tennant orders,
"All hands to the main deck. Life rafts cut loose. Abandon ship."
Not one man had left his place of duty until being ordered to do so. But now, dozens of men pour up through the hatches from below or scramble down ladders from stations high in the superstructure. The crew start jumping over the side into a spreading pool of oil. As the ship lists further, men begin climbing up the sloping deck and start to slide down the huge raised starboard side of the battle cruiser. Hundreds of men get away in minutes. However, below decks, many loudspeakers are not working, and the men don't hear the order to abandon ship. As she continues rolling over to port, the huge torpedo bulge and its jagged torpedo hull emerge out of the water, and the stern rears up to expose her still turning propellers. The stern then slips below the waves and disappears, leaving her bow hanging in the air, before it too vanishes beneath the waves. Just 11 minutes after the first torpedo had struck her, Captain Tennant fights his way to the surface, emerging by a nearby raft. There's another attack. The Japanese are still not done. A 500-kilogram bomb hits the Prince of Wales, adding to its inevitable defeat. By 12:50 p.m, the end is nigh for the Prince of Wales. She's taken on an estimated 18,000 tons of water. Captain Leach orders all the wounded to leave the ship.
This is the end.
No.
He leaves the bridge and comes down to the quarterdeck, where a large group of his crew had congregated.
Gentlemen, she's been badly riddled. We need men to try and maneuver back to Singapore. If you go, that's fine. His Majesty needs every sailor possible. But let's help our old girl out one last time, eh?
There's a slight hesitation. Surely the ship is sinking. They haven't got a hope of navigating to a friendly port. A silence follows before 2 men let go of the rail and salute. A petty officer and several other ratings also step forward, salute, and fall in behind Leach. Captain Leach smiles and declares an order to those present.
Aside from gunners, marines and officers, those who wish to board the Express can do so. God save the King.
He then climbs back up to the bridge to join Admiral Phillips. Hundreds of men started crossing over to Express on makeshift lines and gangplanks. But as the Prince of Wales rolls further over onto her port side and her starboard side lifts, the gap between her and Express starts to widen. The gangplanks fall into the sea, but men continue to swing across on ropes and the cable that still join the 2 ships. Under the incredible strain, the cable finally snaps. The Lister port starts to worsen. It was clear the ship was now beyond any help from aircraft, destroyers or tugs. Leach comes to the realization that his ship's not going anywhere and reluctantly gives the order.
Abandon ship.
The battleship's starboard bilge keel rises. The skipper of Express skillfully judges the last moment before he's forced to pull away, her hull bumping and grinding on the battleship's heaving keel and almost getting overturned herself. The destroyer suffers a 20-foot gash in her hull from the contact, but many men have been saved. Admiral Sir Tom Phillips remains on the bridge almost to the end. He and Captain Leach, silent, contemplating their defeat. The last reports seeing them alive are at 13:24, when the 2 men are on the side of the horizontal ship. just before she rolls over and capsizes. The destroyer Electra sent a simple signal to headquarters in Singapore. HMS Prince of Wales, sunk. Tragically, in 2023, the Malaysian Coast Guard seized a Chinese ship on suspicion of looting the wrecks. The Chinese dredger Chuan Hong 68 was detained. On board were found shells suspected to be from the HMS Prince of Wales and the HMS Repulse. It's April the 18th, 1943, and a squadron of P-38s races low over the waves of the Pacific. In the formation, First Lieutenant Rex Barber struggles under the oppressive heat of the cockpit, but he soldiers on, aware that they're on the hunt for the highest profile target of their careers, Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the man who orchestrated Pearl Harbor, who flaunted that he'll negotiate peace at the White House. The American squadron presses on, the shore of Bougainville coming into view. Rex Barber scans the skies. Intelligence had been very specific. 1 Betty bomber and 2 flights of 3 Zeros, right here, right at this time. Their plan is simple and calculated. 12 Lightnings are going to climb high and cover them from above, while remaining P-38s, a 4-man killer group, will focus entirely on the bomber with the target. They almost reach Bougainville when the radio signal comes in. As if on cue, an enemy formation emerges between the clouds. 6 Zeros, however, not 1, but 2 Betty bombers. American pilots are taken aback. Their plan is falling apart.
Which one of them is Yamamoto's?
We'll have to take them both.
Roger.
The formation slams their throttles to full, charging into battle. All around Barber, 12 of his squadmates climb rapidly into the sky, taking position as top cover and leaving the 4 chosen to perform the daring charge. But there's more problems. First Lieutenant Besby Holmes' drop tanks aren't coming off. Barber is nervous to see Holmes dive out of formation, picking up speed to shake off the tanks. Wingman Raymond Hine quickly follows to protect him, cutting the killer's flight numbers in half. Their chances are worse than ever. They have double the targets and half the fighters. Yamamoto is right in front of them. Hell would freeze over before the American pilots let him go. Yamamoto is on his way to visit one of their forward operating airfields around Bougainville with 8 of his officers, and among them is his second-in-command, Loyal Chief of Staff Matomi Ugaki. Ugaki is dozing off in his seat when unexpectedly one of their Zero escorts races past and slows right in front of his Betty's nose, shaking his wings. Confused, Ugaki takes a closer look and realizes the pilot is waving his hand, frenetically pointing at something. Then suddenly, the radio operator shouts for the pilot to dive, and the Betty breaks into an abrupt, evasive maneuver. The officers all hang on for dear life as the Japanese bomber plunges into a desperate dive. Ugaki is trying and failing to spot Yamamoto's aircraft. Outside, 3 Zeros dive for the pair of incoming P-38s, desperate to stop the attack. Lamphere breaks formation, climbing to attack the Japanese fighters head-on and leaving Barber to charge in alone. Lamphere opens fire and the Zeros respond in kind, with tracers crisscrossing in the sky. Lamphere's unfazed as low-caliber guns strike him in the wings, the sounds reverberating through the fuselage like hail. He holds the trigger down, unleashing his weapons until the Zeros are forced to pull off from the collision course. Barber, though, carries on, leaving the melee behind. Before him, the 2 Bettys separate in opposite directions. He picks one at random and gives chase. But he's not alone. Suddenly, a tracer streaks past just in front of his cockpit. A Zero from Lamphere's fight has chased him down and is firing in from above. The tracers continue to zip past his windshield. He fights the urge to pull away and aims his sights square on the bomber. Barber pulls the trigger. and unleashes a hail of 50 caliber and 20mm fire. The shells rip through the enemy aircraft, parts full away from the engine cowling, and a plume of oil pours out of the machine. But Barber is relentless. He holds the trigger down, even as he hears and feels his own aircraft being hit from behind. He'll have to take this bomber, even if it's the last thing he ever does. But then, the Zero hounding him roars past, giving him a few vital moments of reprieve. Barber takes a better aim and continues dismantling the bomber, tearing it apart as he chases it all the way down to treetop height. Then, suddenly, the bomber pulls up out of control and rolls in the air. Barber immediately dodges, barely missing the bomber's wing as it tumbles out of control and crashes into a tree below, exploding into a massive fireball. Barber looks back over his shoulder to see a column of black smoke rising from the green. He sets off for the next one. But 3 more Zeros intercept him from above. They open fire and Barber dodges, diving away for speed as he listens to the enemy bullets striking the wings and tail, the crackle of impacts echoing through the fuselage. Barber skims the treetops, dodging left and right in a desperate fight for survival. The 3 enemies are refusing to ease up. But just as things get dire, he spots the 2 P-38s of Holmes and Hine up ahead. There's hope. He flies towards them, praying for them to see him. To his luck, his prayers are answered. The pair of lightnings turn straight towards him, charging into the rescue. But muzzle flashes shine on their noses. His heart sinks. Time slows to a crawl as the friendly tracers barrel down straight towards him. He holds his aircraft steady, and the shells streak by all around him. He's surrounded by lead. Shots allied an enemy enveloping his machine. The lightnings come closer and closer, guns blazing, until they roar past overhead, and suddenly, the skies fall to an abrupt calm. Barber looks back, shaken. All the aircraft are gone. The P-38s are speeding off, and the Zeros have been scattered by the 2 lightnings' daring attack. He takes a deep breath and sets off for the last Betty. Holmes and Hine turn back around after saving Barber's tail. The shot had been risky, but it had worked, and now they chased after the last remaining bomber. Holmes hunts it down as it tries to escape, skimming the waves out to sea. Holmes opens fire, dumping as much ammunition as he can into the massive target. But the aircraft stubbornly remains aloft as it fills more and more of his windshield.
Go down or blow up, damn it.
He keeps up the attack for as long as he dare, before dodging low, sending his P-38 roaring through the gap between the enemy and the sea. Rex Barber watches his squadmate narrowly avoid collision with a severely wounded Betty, but then he quickly realizes that the target is still flying. He dives in without skipping a beat and gets right on the bomber's tail and pulls the trigger. His volley strikes the fuel tank and detonates the fumes. The bomber is engulfed in flames and plunges into the sea. Barber has no time to react, and he flies straight into the explosion with flames surrounding his aircraft. But he emerges on the other side, unharmed. He can't celebrate just yet. Right ahead, he sees Holmes and Hine tangling with a pair of Zeros. Hine's P-38 is littered with lead and dives away with heavy damage, while one of the Zeros is taken out by Holmes. Barber crashes into the fight, catching the last Zero unaware and gunning him out of the sky.
How's your subscribe level? Very low. How about out here? If everyone subscribed, then that would be the mission accomplished.
Then, finally, the squadron leader comes through on the radio.
Everyone, get your ass home.
But while a jubilant squadron returns to base, a figure emerges from the sea, surrounded by the flaming wreck of his aircraft. It's Matomi Ugaki, badly injured, but alive. The pilot also miraculously survived, and together the two men both swam back to shore, clinging on to a piece of debris. A third survivor would also be picked up by flying boat after the accident, becoming the only 3 crew from the bombers to return home. Yamamoto had been in the first bomber. He was killed by Barbara's gunfire before the aircraft even crashed. His body was found and he was buried. His loss inflicted a heavy emotional wound for the Japanese. The widely respected admiral was mourned across the nation. He was given a full state funeral with the highest of honors, which crowds gathered to attend. Very few were affected harder than Ugaki, who never forgave himself for surviving the attack. He would write about the events in his diary, recalling, "Tracers flashed by our wings and the pilot frantically maneuvered to evade. I waited impatiently for the airplane to return to horizontal position so that I could observe the Admiral's bomber. Although I hoped for the best, I knew only too well what the fate of the airplane would be." The P-38's nose seemed to burst into twinkling flame, and suddenly the bomber shook from the impact of the enemy's machine gun bullets and cannon shells. Everything turned black. I felt the crushing force of salt water pouring into the fuselage, and almost immediately we were below the surface. Ugaki continued to serve in the Navy for the rest of the war, until the Emperor declared the end of hostilities on the 15th of August 1945. Indignant, that same day he dressed in his officer's clothes, took a ceremonial sword gifted to him by Yamamoto, and set off in the last kamikaze attack of the war. On the American side, the death of Yamamoto was received with great fanfare, but not all was celebration. Tragically, First Lieutenant Raymond Hine would never make it home. His crippled P-38 gave out underneath him somewhere in the return flight. Every member of the flight would be given the Navy Cross for their involvement in the attack. Rex Barber would survive the war and return home, passing away on July the 26th, 2001. It's just past midnight on November the 13th, 1942. An American task force sails through the dark off the coast of Guadalcanal Island. Rear Admiral Daniel Judson Callahan stands aboard the cruiser USS San Francisco, steeling his nerves. He's in command of a ragtag fleet, cobbled together from 13 surviving ships from previous engagements in the region. But they can't dwell on their condition, for they're being tasked with saving the United States' one and only airfield in the entire island from an incoming enemy fleet. The lives of thousands of Marines, and perhaps the success of the Guadalcanal campaign itself, lies on his shoulders. Just a few dozen miles away, 2 beasts and their pack emerge from a storm. They are the battle cruisers IJN Yamato and Kirishima, each over 3 times the size of the biggest American cruisers and sporting guns almost twice the caliber, followed closely by a further dozen ships. Aboard the Hiei, Admiral Hiroaki Abe examines his maps.
Prepare for bombardment.
But just as the guns are loaded, the radio operator gives a warning to Abe.
Sir, rearguard ships report enemy contact up ahead.
Admiral Abe is taken aback. That makes no sense. How can the ships at the rear report contacts ahead? And how have his screening destroyers not seen them? Someone must be completely out of position.
Contact the ships and get me their location.
Back in the American fleet, Callahan knows there's a Japanese fleet out there. They should be somewhere to port, but the dark hides the enemy ships away. An aide calls for his attention.
Sir, USS Cushing reports an enemy up ahead.
Callahan goes wide-eyed. How can they be up ahead?
Tell Cushing to stand by to open fire.
Aboard the USS Cushing, the captain has relayed the order.
Sir, Callahan orders to stand by to open fire.
But disaster strikes. Instead of standing by to fire, the captain of the Cushing orders,
"Stop and stand by to fire."
Behind the Cushing, commanding officer William Hank watches aboard the USS Laffey and is surprised to see the Cushing stopping. The Laffey slows, but then The ship behind the Laffy is also forced to stop, and then the ship behind that too. The front of the formation becomes a slow-motion train wreck as one by one the captains slow to avoid a collision, each with less time to react than the last. The fifth ship in line, the cruiser USS Atlanta, realizes far too late and barrels straight towards the back of the other ships.
We're going to hit! Rudder to port!
USS Atlanta turns away from their line, avoiding the stack at the front. But then things go from bad to worse.
Sir, contact to the east. USS Cushing reports an enemy up ahead. 3 contacts east. How do we slot back in?
Contacts are appearing from everywhere. Callahan can barely keep up. Back with the Japanese, everything is in chaos. They battle to switch the incendiary shells that they have stored and loaded replacement with armor-piercing ammunition. Meanwhile, the captains across the fleet struggle to find one another. Abe is receiving constant updates, although with the heavy squall, he's not exactly sure where his ships are. But it's imperative the Japanese can see the enemy. The ships Hiei and Akatsuki are ordered to activate searchlights and light up the enemy. The chaos in the American ranks is suddenly ended when 2 ships pierce the dark and illuminate the USS Atlanta standing alone out of position. Soon after, the thunder of guns breaks the night's silence. Atlanta firing blind into the light sources and soon receiving enemy fire in return. Turrets up and down the American line unleash their firepower, shooting everything they've got at the 2 lights. They can't see the enemy, so they choose their target at random, not realizing the danger and the value of the Hiei. Desperate, Callahan orders,
Odd ships, fire starboard! Even ships, fire to port!
Confusion spreads across the ranks. Some ships turning their guns away from the battle to aim towards suspected targets on the opposite side, while the others disregard the order and fire anything that looks like an enemy. Meanwhile, USS Atlanta is stuck in the middle of the crossfire, unknowingly firing at the smaller IJN Akatsuki. But despite their visual blindness, the radar targeting helps nail the enemy vessel, pummeling it and starting fires across its hull. But it's not without a price. Return fire rains down on Atlanta. Shell after shell strikes her hull. On the other side of the battle, USS San Francisco fires its next salvo, just as Atlanta wanders into the line of fire. The San Francisco shells strike square into the bridge of the Atlanta, wiping out most of the bridge crew. The Atlanta floats adrift and on fire, but her guns still roar. They fire shot after shot at the burning Akatsuki. The gunners are determined to fight to the bitter end. And then the fires find their way to the Akatsuki's magazine. The ship detonates into a massive explosion, the entire ship vanishing in the blink of an eye. The shockwave washes over the battlefield. Admiral Abe is shocked by Akatsuki's violent end and orders Hiei to back down from the attack. Its searchlight is extinguished and the sea is plunged back into darkness, only illuminated by the flames of burning ships. Commanding Officer William Hank of the USS Laffy directs his men as Callahan regroups his ships through the radio.
Ship off the port bow!
It's the battlecruiser Hiei. Over 22 times the Laffy's weight. It's a monster, and they're on a collision course.
Dear Lord. Gunners, open fire! Give me everything!
But the shells from the 5-inch guns ping harmlessly off the Hiei's armoured hull. The USS Cushing joins in on the attack, also doing little as the Hiei pushes on its inexorable path straight for the Laffy.
310, full flank ahead, emergency power!
The Laffy accelerates, going as fast as it can to escape the monster. Hank braces for impact. He looks up at the battlecruiser as they sail just in front of the Hiei, barely scraping through.
Keep firing! Keep firing!
The American ships keep shooting at the superstructure with all they have, the shells piercing through and wrecking the rooms within. At the bridge, Admiral Abe ignores the punishment his ship is taking. He's focused on strategizing the battle when suddenly, a shell punches clean through the bridge armor, flying a cone of shrapnel across the room and straight for the gathered officers. Admiral Abe steadies himself from the shock. He's bleeding and in pain, and his chief of staff lies dead. Despite this, the crew of the Laffy see the Hiei's giant guns turn ominously towards a pair of American destroyers. Desperate, Hank takes a gamble.
Fire the torpedoes!
They shoot off the launcher and plunge into the sea. American lives are hinging on the 8 bubble trails speeding towards their target. But the Laffy is far too close, and they don't arm. The USS Laffy's hopes bounce right off the Hiei's hull. Please support the channel, comment, like, and subscribe on this video. The Japanese battlecruiser fires with a soul-shaking explosion. Hank sees the giant shots fly over his head, streaking past and slamming into the Cushing. The shells detonate and annihilate the ship, reducing it to scrap with one brutal strike. The enemy destroyers reappear from the shadows, surrounding and opening fire on the lone American ship.
Sir, more contacts to starboard. We're taking heavy damage.
Hank knows it's all over.
Abandoned ship.
On the opposite side of Hiei, and away from the Laffy's demise, Admiral Callahan sets his sights on the burning battlecruiser. He ordered his own cruiser, the USS San Francisco, and the nearby USS Portland to hunt it down. San Francisco opens fire with an 8-inch weaponry, striking the superstructure and piercing through the weakest bands of hull armor, wreaking havoc on the ship's internals. But Hiei is far from done. The massive weapons turn around and take aim square at San Francisco. 8 1,485-pound incendiary shells fly across the sky. They detonate into the San Francisco's deck with spectacular explosions, rocking the ship and lighting massive fires.
Damage report!
Superficial. No critical damage.
More explosions rock the ship, but do little. Hiei's ammunition is still the wrong type. It didn't matter against the small destroyers, but against a cruiser like the San Francisco, it makes a world of difference.
Keep firing! Take out those guns!
San Francisco and Portland keep putting pressure on Hiei, taking shots as if they were invincible. One of their salvos strikes at the Hiei's stern, heavily damaging her rudder. But then, Hiei's hoists run out of incendiary shells. Next up is proper armor-piercing ammunition. Hiei's next shot punches through the San Francisco like butter, burying deep within and detonating inside, destroying an entire section of the ship. Radio cuts out and reports of injuries and damage come flooding in. Another brutal impact strikes San Francisco, then another and another. Hiei's next volley impacts square on the cruiser's bridge. The devastation is absolute. No one is spared. Callahan and most of the bridge are killed instantly. But then a lone man picks himself up. Communications officer Bruce McCandless rises from the dead, miraculously missed by the explosion. In an incredible display of sheer raw determination, he stammers over to the captain's radio and takes it over. He has no command experience whatsoever. His position doesn't even feature on the chain of succession, but he must act. Just from what he's learned watching Callahan, he begins issuing flawless directional orders, guiding the crippled cruiser and her crew out of danger, but not out of the battle. McCandless has the presence of mind to realize the flagship escaping the scene would cause panic and a rout, dooming the defense. Instead, he identifies a relatively safe position in the chaotic battle and directs the ship towards it. Then suddenly, Damage Control Officer Herbert Schonland bursts into the bridge, rushing to take command, as procedure would dictate. But there he finds McCandless standing alone, issuing orders. Without exchanging a word, Schonland nods and runs back to his men. Back at the Hiei, Admiral Abe is tended to by his medical staff. He's cut and beaten. With his ship crippled and on fire, Abe calls off the bombardment. The Japanese ships retreat. Among them is the fleet's second battlecruiser, the IJN Kirishima. But the battle has become such a disorganized brawl that many ships are in no position to pull back. They're left behind, abandoned by their more powerful allies. The battle drags on, ending in a whimper. By sunrise, wrecked ships lay scattered across the sea, burning, sinking adrift. Hundreds of sailors from both sides float in the water, hoping for rescue. IJN Hiei would later be sunk by aircraft from the field it failed to destroy. By the end of the day, the Japanese lost a battlecruiser, 2 destroyers, and 552 sailors. The Americans suffered even greater, losing 1,439 sailors, 2 cruisers, and 4 destroyers. Abe would survive the sinking of the Hiei, but would be heavily criticized for what the Japanese saw as snatching defeat from the jaws of victory if only they had pressed on. Tactically, the Americans claimed victory as they successfully kept Henderson Field intact, but at a heavy cost. But while the battle was finally over, the war was not. The fight for Henderson Field would continue the very next day. 4:30 a.m. on April the 16th, 1945, the Battle of Okinawa. A sailor struggles to keep awake in the destroyer, the USS Taffy. The radar pings in front of him and multiple enemy contacts appear. The man snaps awake and sounds the alarm. A siren blares, and across the ship, sailors run for their positions. Commander F. Julian Beckton bursts into the bridge, demanding updates.
Multiple contacts. Closest 20 miles out. But it's turning away again.
Beckton's adrenaline immediately wears off, and the gathered officers groan with various levels of frustration. The Japanese have been doing this the whole night, poking into their radars just enough to get them to act, and then leave.
It's on purpose. They're trying to keep us tired for an attack.
Silence reigns over the bridge. No one lets it show, but they're all afraid. They're acting as a radar station right in the path between mainland Japan and the ongoing operations in Okinawa. The Taffy is the first thing every Japanese fighter, bomber and kamikaze sees on their way to battle. Multiple ships trying to man this post have been hit by kamikazes, suffering heavy casualties.
Keep the men on station, rotate them as needed. We can't afford to take an eye off the sky.
Backup flies above their heads. It's 3 divisions of F-4U Corsairs, nicknamed the Grim Reapers. These warriors of the sky are the first line of defense. But at 7:30 a.m., things start to go wrong.
Reapers, do you copy? Reapers, do you copy?
Contact with the Corsairs is lost. Beckton is horrified. Without air cover, they suddenly find themselves extremely vulnerable.
Huge enemy formation. They're coming from the north.
Beckton takes one look at the screen and his blood runs cold. He would later write, "That screen had so many dots on it that it looked at times like an advanced case of chickenpox."
Everyone to battle stations. Engine, give us everything you got. Where are the Corsairs?
The Corsairs still aren't responding, sir.
A sense of doom washes over him. They're alone. Alarms blare across the ship, and men are sent running for their posts. From the formation, 6 kamikazes peel off to hunt Taffy, starting in a slow circle. From a distance, 2 make their move and pounce.
Target, sir. 11 miles out. Closing fast.
Flanking speed.
9 miles out.
Stand by for main battery.
Outside, everything stands still. Men have their eyes locked on the sky, gripping the firing button as they listen to the distant rumble of engines, getting closer.
7 miles.
At the last moment, Beckton decides he's moving to the flying bridge.
Let's drop some lead on these mother...
Fire!
He's just in time to witness the powerful boom of Taffy's 5-inch main guns. The sky is littered with flak as the first pair of kamikazes dive in off the ship's bow. The brave Japanese pilot leading the charge through puffs of flak. But it's for nothing as a full 5-inch shell impacts the Japanese aircraft square on the nose, violently disintegrating it into a ball of flame. A second Japanese plane charges through the smoke of the fallen. The 40mm guns open up, shredding the plane as it speeds ever closer. But it doesn't fall. It enters the range of the 20mm, and they too join in. The entirety of Taffy is pouring out lead as fast as it can until the enemy aircraft finally rips apart, until it smashes into the sea 3,000 yards away. But there's no time to celebrate, as seconds later, 2 more Japanese planes appear off the stern, flying at wave-top height. The Taffy's 5-inch guns take aim at the incoming enemies and open fire. The depressed weapons are barely clearing the 20mm gun emplacements in their way. The crew of the anti-aircraft gun take cover as they're hit with the muzzle blast. Beckton orders a turn, trying to bring more guns to bear as the enemy gets ever closer. The Japanese pilot is just seconds from impact when a shell rips off its wing and sends it tumbling into the sea. The 4th plane also attempts a daring charge, braving the exploding shells and storm of lead. The Americans fire with all they have, and the enemy stubbornly presses on, desperate to take as many Americans down with him as he can. Taffy punishes the enemy. The plane cartwheels across the sea before sinking beneath the waves.
Yeah, got it.
But they're still not done. The last 2 of the 6 aircraft charge to the attack, 1 from port and 1 from starboard. Most guns turn to starboard and open fire, but meanwhile, the portside plane pushes through with lesser resistance, rapidly accelerating towards the ship. The starboard plane is torn to pieces, falling from the sky as flaming confetti. But the Americans have ignored the second enemy for too long. He opens fire with machine guns, strafing the Laffy and inflicting significant casualties on the exposed sailors. The guns rush to fire at the last plane as it careens down towards the ship. A wall of shells meets it in return. But nothing can stop gravity, and the flying wreck is coming straight for the ship. Sailors, seeing the incoming plane, flee for their lives, shouting and running while the rest of the ship's guns open fire to the bitter end. Becton screams to turn the rudder hard to starboard in a desperate attempt to evade the enemy. The wreck slams into the sea with a soul-shaking explosion, its bomb detonating and sending a wave of shrapnel across the deck, but miraculously, the ship survives. The sky falls into an eerie calm. Enemies still linger in the distance, but none pounce. The crew takes a moment to drag the wounded to the infirmary and compose themselves, having just enough time to get a drink of water and for the reality of their situation to sink in. After 7 eternal minutes of suspense, another enemy turns for Laffy. Becton turns the ship to give the incoming plane his broadside, allowing all his guns to unleash upon the enemy. The Val evades left and right, attempting to aim straight for Laffy's bridge. Becton can see the enemy's aim clear as day and orders evasive maneuvers of their own.
Rudder to port!
Enemy races in, but he's aimed poorly. He's forced to abort and turns away, still under fire. But once clear, he determinedly dives in for the Laffy's bridge one more time. Becton voices an endless stream of orders.
Rudder to port!
Aye, aye, sir.
Head on! To starboard!
Aye, aye, sir.
It's a high-stakes game of cat and mouse as he desperately hides the bridge from the Val's flight path again and again, the aircraft somehow still flying despite numerous hits. Aboard the ship, a gun captain leads his 5-inch turret from the hatch atop the mount when one of the barrels stops working.
What happened? It's stuck. It won't elevate.
Cursing his luck and without time for a proper repair, the captain jumps off the mount, takes a hammer, and slams the base of the barrel. Meanwhile, in the air, the pilot can feel his own aircraft falling apart underneath him, and in desperation, he gives up chasing for the bridge. He turns straight for the main part of the ship and dives in. The guns zero in on him, shredding his Val, as one of the Laffy's turrets fills his windshield. The aircraft zips in and crashes on top of the gun, and destroying the hatch the gun captain had been in just 2 seconds ago. The wreck and a flood of flaming gasoline fly over his head, the Val flying off into the sea as the deck is engulfed in flames. The gun captain and other nearby men rush to get the flames under control. Becton watches the scene unfold, but then he hears the shouts of a lookout.
Contact the port! Coming in fast!
His heart sinks. He's been too focused on starboard. He orders the 5-inch guns to turn towards the new threat, but it's far too late and can't turn in time. 40mm guns open up on the enemy. The fate of the entire ship is on their shoulders, and in the most crucial moment thus far, they excel. The enemy fighter detonates in midair and falls into the sea just 200 yards away. The gunners cheer, but the nightmare is far from over.
Where on earth are the damn Grim Reapers?
Oh, radio's still screwed.
Then the 9th Japanese plane appears, skimming the waves on the port side, determined to crash into the Laffy. Damaged 5-inch guns are unable to attack. The 40mm guns open fire, nicking and striking the enemy, but it still flies and enters the range of the 20mm guns. They join in on the defense, but the enemy powers through. Fear grips the men's souls as they realize with dread, this one is not going to fall. Inside the Japanese plane, the pilot sees the ship fill his windshield. He closes his eyes. he never feels the impact. The Japanese plane crashes into the superstructure behind a 40mm gun. Its wing is ripped off. Flaming fuel sprays across the deck. The rest of the airframe falls off the starboard side, and its bomb detonates in the water. But some AA guns have been engulfed in flames, and the crates of ammunition start to cook off. One by one, the shells explode with loud bangs, glowing hot shrapnel, flinging off in every which way. In that section of the Laffy, firefighting becomes the only priority. The men rush to contain the flames, saving the Laffy from catastrophic explosion. But the guns are still crippled. Another Japanese plane appears from the rear. Guns on the very stern open fire, but with so many weapons in the aft out of commission now, their volume of fire isn't enough, and the Val smashes into the stern, devastating the interior. The stern of the Laffy is now a burning inferno, and without defences, it's also the easiest place to strike. Another plane sweeps in, but this time it drops its bomb into the stern. The explosion takes out the ship's rudder and breaches the hull, locking it on a 26-degree turn to port. Laffy is now stuck in a perpetual circle. Becton no longer has enough control to evade more attacks, but more attacks come. There's a huge number of enemies in the sky, so many he can't even count them. Becton watches as 2 aircraft peel off the circling swarm and dive into the attack. He orders the ship to flank speed. It's the only thing he can do, and it's not enough. The few guns in the stern open fire on the first incoming plane, but they're not enough, and the plane slams into the ship, almost unimpeded. Dozens of sailors fall, and deadly fires spread. The second follows soon after, but its bomb fails to explode and clatters across the deck. A group of sailors manage to pick it up and throw it overboard. The swarm continues to circle, waiting for their turn. Somehow, the ship remains afloat, but Becton knows it's a hopeless battle. Laffy needs a miracle.
Corsairs, they're back!
A flight of American fighters charges into the scene, immediately cutting down 4 of the circling kamikazes and turning them into streaks of fire. The Grim Reapers are here. In the air, the swarm of aircraft scatters in every direction, and a battle breaks out in the skies. But it's hardly a dogfight, it's a slaughter. The undertrained pilots in their obsolete aircraft are no match for the American fighters, and they go down in flames, one after the other. If you enjoyed this video, we'd really appreciate your subscription, and you can join us on Discord. Thank you. But Laffy isn't out of the woods yet. In desperation, several Japanese make a turn for the destroyer, determined to take the ship down with them. The first dives in with a Corsair hot on its tail. The Laffy gunners open fire, but miss out of fear of hitting their ally. Becton watches the Key 43 with horror as it comes barreling towards him. He drops to the floor, and the 2 aircraft both roar overhead. Both fighters clip the Laffy's mast just above his head. The Japanese plane spins and crashes into the sea, while the Corsair pulls up into the air, and the pilot, incredibly, bails out. In the process, the American flag from the mast drops onto the deck. Signalman Second Class Thomas B. McCarthy instantly told a sailor nearby,
"We've got to get that back up there."
In the middle of combat, McCarthy retrieves the fallen flag and climbs the mast. Becton spots him climbing, but doesn't interrupt, returning to command while McCarthy mounts the flag high on a cable for all the sailors to see.
Yeah, got it. Good job.
4 more Japanese kamikazes charge in one by one, and the gunners take them all down by the skin of their teeth. One of them is getting close as 50 yards before slamming into the sea. Becton is impressed by his men's gunnery.
Captain, we're in pretty bad shape aft. Do you think we'll have to abandon ship?
Becton doesn't have to think it over. After so much courage by his men, so many heroics, it would be a crime to let us sink.
Hell no! We still have guns that can shoot.
A bomber sweeps in and drops his ordnance into the Laffy's battered stern. Then another bomber charges straight for the bridge. An officer sees it coming and tackles Becton to the floor, moments before a volley of bullets rips through the structure. The bomber roars overhead, but immediately after, it's caught up by a corsair and cut down from the sky. Then another bomber comes in from the port bow with 2 corsairs in hot pursuit, doing all the damage they can until it's hit in the ammunition and explodes right above the sailor's head. What's left of the bomber crashes into the waves. Then, suddenly, there's silence. After 80 minutes of hell, everything fell quiet. The crew can barely believe it. Becton asks himself, why would the enemy let up when they were so close? But then he looks up to see 24 Allied corsairs and wildcats covering them, and not a single Japanese in sight. Still, the ship was left a burning wreck, and Becton feared that after everything they would have to abandon it, but they managed to keep the ship that wouldn't die afloat. The attack tragically claimed 33 of the 336-man crew, with 70 more injured. The Grim Reapers scored 33 victories during the defense. Incredibly, the ship that was attacked by 22 kamikazes and wouldn't die is still afloat. You can visit the USS Laffey at Patriots Point Naval Museum, South Carolina. It's the early morning of October the 25th, 1944, near the Strait of San Bernardino in the Philippines. Lieutenant Commander Robert Witcher Copeland is having his morning coffee at the bridge of USS Samuel B. Roberts after a sleepless night patrolling the waters. They are part of Taffy 3, a carrier group made out of 6 escort carriers, 3 Fletcher-class destroyers, and 5 Butler-class escort destroyers, like his own. Their mission is to provide air support to the landings of Leyte Gulf, which leaves the destroyers in a simple bodyguard and patrol role. It's shaping up as an uneventful task. That is until he receives a radio transmission warning him of surface radar contacts heading their way. Copeland doesn't even have time to take any action before one of his lookouts reports,
"Object on the horizon, sir."
"Everyone to battle stations!"
he orders without skipping a beat. Trouble lays ahead. In the distance, the center force of the Imperial Japanese Navy pushes into battle. It's made out of 11 destroyers, 2 light cruisers, 6 heavy cruisers, 3 battleships, and in the middle of them all is the biggest warship to ever grace the seas, the pride of the Imperial Navy, the Yamato. The commander of Taffy 3 immediately directs the carrier group to move east in haste and lay down smoke. Aircraft take off from the carriers and engage. The planes throw everything they can at the Japanese: bombs, torpedoes, depth charges, as well as strafing runs. But the Japanese force is just too vast, and the planes run out of ammunition and are forced to withdraw to rearm and refuel. Copeland relays the order, and the men activate the chemical smoke generators as well as overload the boilers with fuel, causing the vessel to billow black smoke out of the smokestack. As they do, Copeland spots massive, colourful splashes rising up from the waves. The Japanese are firing their first ranging shots. The rest of the destroyers mirror the USS Roberts, quickly deploying a vast wall of black and white smoke in front of the carriers as they continue their run east, heading straight for an isolated storm. The splashes get closer and closer as the Japanese gunners zero in on their targets, threatening to strike at any second. But to the Americans' fortune, they reach a rain squall and visibility drops drastically. The torrent of rain and the smokescreen combine to hide the vulnerable ships from the Japanese. The bombardment continues though, but with limited visibility it becomes inaccurate and slows to a crawl, giving the fleet precious time to regroup and prepare. Copeland is still coordinating the release of smoke when he receives a transmission from the commander. All destroyers are ordered to attack with torpedoes. Copeland swiftly asks if the commander wants Butler-class and Fletcher-class to attack simultaneously. The response comes back negative. The Fletcher-class are to go in first. The Fletcher-class ships push out into battle. Copeland is left waiting, listening to the thunder of guns through the mist and smog. The wait is tortuous. He thinks to himself, my God, how are we going to work this? Contemplating the dangers ahead, he gets on the loudspeaker and tells the crew,
this will be a fight against overwhelming odds, from which survival cannot be expected. We will do what damage we can.
The Fletchers complete the attack run and race away into the relative safety of the smokescreen, receiving strike after strike from the enemy fleet. Amidst the chaos, the second attack run isn't organized and the Butler-class destroyers hesitate as to when to start. But Copeland doesn't wait. He slams the EOT to full power and the ship charges into battle. He sails straight into the enemy at 20 knots. He identifies the heavy cruiser, Chikai, as a first big target nearby, almost in ideal position for torpedo attack, and orders to go straight for it. Enemy shells begin falling around him, but they push on fearlessly. Amidst the hellfire, he radios Lieutenant Trowbridge, the engineering officer, and tells him,
Lucky, as soon as we fire our fish, I will ring up flank speed and you give me everything you got.
The shelling intensifies. Geysers of seawater lift into the sky all around them, some striking mere yards away. A shell impacts the ship's mast and the debris rains down upon the deck. A metal beam strikes the torpedo launcher, jamming it. Copeland is warned, but fortunately the launcher is already aiming overboard. Already committed to the run, he eyeballs a new attack approach to account for the angle of the launchers and keeps going. Shells continue to pummel the sea surrounding him, but they too miss by sheer luck. Coming in hot, 4,000 yards away from Chikai, Copeland orders, fire! And the 3 torpedoes dive into the seas. The fish are away. The ship immediately turns to escape, and Copeland slams the EOT to flanking speed. Below deck, Trowbridge bypasses every safety measure. The boiler pressure rockets past its design limit, and the ship accelerates to a blistering 28 knots.
She cannot take much more, Captain.
Behind them, the HIJMS Chikai is rocked by an explosion as one of the torpedoes hits its mark. But they have no time to celebrate as other ships keep up their rain of shells. They keep running with all they have, zigzagging through a storm of high explosives. In the middle of it all, Copeland sees an Allied destroyer torn to pieces, limping along. The captain is standing on her stern, bloodied and hurt, still commanding the ship by shouting orders down a hatch to the engine room below. The captain gives Copeland a friendly wave as they sail by in the midst of battle. Copeland returns to a devastating scene. Nearly the entire fleet has suffered heavy damage, yet they still fight. Copeland radios his gunners and orders to open fire upon the nearest enemy, the cruiser Chikuma. The 5-inch weapons fire upon the cruiser. They are pitiful compared to the firepower wielded by the Japanese, but the gunners are determined to make it count. They fire round after round into the exposed superstructure of the Chikuma, all the while dodging 8-inch fire themselves. Inside turret number 2, the gunner's mate 3rd class, Paul Henry Carr, fires anything and everything that comes up the ammunition hoist. Armor-piercing, high-explosive, AA proximity fuse, even smoke and star shells used for lighting up battlefields at night. A similar scene takes place in turret number 1 as the little destroyer tears through the superstructure of the Chikuma. Their accurate fire disables an 8-inch turret, and the star shells light fires all across the deck. The fight drags on for 45 minutes, during which the gunners fire nearly all of the 5-inch ammunition stored on board. But then a lookout shouts inside the bridge, "Captain, 14-inch splashes behind us!" Copeland looks back, just in time, to see the massive water geysers lifting up into the sky, inches away from their stern. He runs for the EOT and pulls it to full reverse. The ship's hull shudders under the stress as it grinds to an abrupt halt. They even begin reversing when Copeland hears a loud whoosh of shells streaking overhead and sees them slam into the waters in front. Having dodged them, he pushes the EOT back to full flank ahead, but it's too late. An 8-inch salvo impacts the warship. A shell pierces the engine room and bursts the steam pipes of one of the two boilers. Another one hits below the waterline, and a third takes out all power and communications. The ship is wounded, and the Japanese can tell. The 14-inch main guns of battleship HIJMS Congo take aim and fire. The 1,400-pound shells smash into the vessel, tearing a huge hole under the waterline. Copeland orders abandon ship. The destroyer sinks as our gunners stubbornly continue to fire. An explosion rocks the insides of turret number 2. The barrel and breech are now so hot, it has prematurely detonated the shell's powder charge. A crew member enters the turret and finds Carr against the wall, heavily wounded, shell in hand. The crew member tries to help, but Carr only begs him for help loading one more shell into the breech, not realizing the gun was inoperable. Back at the bridge, Copeland has no more control, no power of communications. There's nothing he can do. He abandons the bridge alongside First Officer Lloyd Gurnett as shells still fall around and into the dying ship. The pair run to the very bow of the vessel as it rises into the air and spot a life raft floating below. They jump. The burning USS Samuel B. Roberts remains afloat for one more hour until it finally capsizes and sinks under the waves, taking with her 90 of the 210-man crew. The Japanese attack was repelled by the unprepared carrier fleet at the end of the day, thwarting their attempts to intervene in the Leyte invasion and sinking 3 heavy cruisers, including Chikai and Chikuma. But the Allied fleet suffered greatly. 2 carriers and 3 destroyers were sunk, and the rest sustained heavy damage. The chaos of the aftermath delayed the rescue. Men weren't picked up from the sea until 24 hours after the battle had ended, some spending up to 50 hours floating adrift. Engineering Officer Lieutenant Herbert W. Trowbridge and Gunner's Mate 3rd Class Paul Carr died in the encounter. They would both be posthumously awarded the Silver Star for their final brave acts, and Carr would have a guided missile frigate named in his honor. Lieutenant Commander Robert Witcher Copeland was rescued from the water alongside his crew. He would be awarded the Navy Cross for his actions, and a frigate was named in his honor. He survived the war and resumed his law career back home. He passed away in his home city of Tacoma, Washington, on August 25, 1973, aged 62. It's the 5th of March 1944. In the Pacific, US fighter aces are jockeying for position, trying to be the first American pilot to beat the victory count of a record that has stood since World War I. Eddie Rickenbacker's 26 victories has never been beaten. Neil Kirby currently has 21 victories, and he's got his eye on Rickenbacker's record. Neil is in his P-47 Thunderbolt, the Fiery Ginger 4, named after his wife, Virginia. Many considered the Thunderbolt inferior to the nimble Japanese planes, but in the hands of Kirby and his pilots, its excellent diving capability and 8 .50 caliber machine guns proved to be a deadly combination. The newer P-38s and P-51s are replacing the aging Thunderbolts. Kirby knows if he can beat the 26 victory record, then the resulting press coverage could save his beloved P-47 to the end of the war at least. With the competition fierce and the record about to be beaten by other American pilots, he's pulled together a fighter sweep with 2 of his friends, Bill Dunham and Sam Blair. Climbing to 22,000 feet, they head along the coast of Papua New Guinea. Far below them, they see a Kawasaki Ki-61 coming into land at a Japanese airfield. They decide to let this flying swallow escape, as it's about to land safely, and they're best staying high for more accessible prey. They need to be patient. Within 5 minutes, they've spotted 3 bombers coming in at 500 feet above the sea. Ki-48s, or Lily bombers. While these were bombers, they were fast and could loop and turn when operated by a skilled pilot. Kirby, Dunham, and Blair decide to attack. The P-47 had amazing diving ability. Building up energy while diving gave them the momentum to quickly climb back up to altitude for another diving pass, a technique that was to become known as boom and zoom. This struck fear into the Japanese as the attacks came with little warning, and the Thunderbolt's 8 50 caliber machine guns were able to wreak havoc on the lightly built Japanese aircraft. The 3 men each targeted a bomber, surprising the Japanese with the incredible firepower of 24 machine guns going off at once. Dunham and Blair shoot down the Japanese bombers that they targeted. However, Kirby, despite peppering the Lily, doesn't manage to down it immediately. Neil Kirby's own rules of combat in the P-47 were to never lose speed and altitude when in a fight, but with the bomber still flying, he made a fatal error. To make a complete circle and attack again to be sure it was downed. All this meant a loss of speed at low altitude. Finishing off the Ki-48, Kirby found himself low and slow, a dangerous place in a P-47. A lone Ki-43 Oscar spotted Kirby while he was slowly climbing, came in close, and filled Kirby's P-47 with lead. Bill Dunham had spotted the danger and was racing to help his friend. Speeding down to help, Dunham took out the Oscar, but it was too late. Searching for Kirby over land and sea, Dunham and Blair eventually were running low on fuel and had to give up the search. The 2 men landed back at base. Bill tried to get his plane refueled and head back out to immediately start the search. But with darkness about to fall, it was no use. In the end, he had to be physically restrained by the others from going out again. 9 months later, Bill Dunham was flying his P-47D over the Philippine Sea. After spotting and downing a Ki-43 Oscar and pulling up, he saw a Japanese pilot escape the wreck and bail out. The Japanese frequently shot at the American pilots who had bailed out. Bill pulled the P-47 around and lined up on the enemy, slowly descending in the parachute. Bill later told his family, "It was if the Lord put his hand on my shoulder and said, 'Bill, don't do it.'" Breaking off the attack, Bill spotted the pilot bobbing in the waves below. Putting his plane into a shallow dive and risking his own life, he went down low over the waves. Opening his canopy, he aimed for the Japanese pilot and threw his Mae West life jacket out of the plane to assist the stricken airman. A painting of this event, called Uncommon Chivalry, hangs in the Seattle Museum of Flight. Kirby's remains were found in the jungle in 1948 by an Australian Air Force search team. In speaking with the villagers, it became apparent that Neil had bailed out successfully, but had received bullet wounds, either in the aircraft or on his descent by parachute. In the National Museum of the US Air Force, you can see a recreation of Kirby's plane, featuring part of the wreck of the original, which was found in the 1990s. Thank you for staying in to the end. Let us know in the comments if you made it all the way here. If only they knew about the Battle of Midway from our perspective. Yes, they should really watch this film.